Let's move on to our game review. Also, don't have a little theme song for that, so I'm going to go da-da-ga-da-da game review. Yeah, Dimitri, hit it.
I can't equal that. I cannot match that. That was beautiful. That was sweet. It was soulful.
I set it up. You did knock it down.
It was R. Kelly-esque.
Let's talk about Terraforming Mars. Now, if you've been living under a board game rock, you don't know what Terraforming Mars is. So let me break it down for you. Terraforming Mars is easily the most successful Euro of the last 3 years. Came out in 2016, was a massive hit, despite the fact that it's kind of ugly and not the most wonderful components. No shame to anybody who worked on it, but I actually like it. I like the way it looks. I like the art style, but I think even the thickness of the cards or some of the components just doesn't necessarily feel up to snuff of a lot of other things. But I think this has done a great service to board gamers because it has proven that really gameplay is all that matters. And people are willing to look aside from, not the highest quality components. It's not full of exciting minis. And it has still flourished and become wildly popular. Definitely the first sort of guaranteed classic of the last couple of years. Like, people will be playing this game in 10 years.
I think that the art is meant to invoke a very specific 1980s, 90s.
It does, but outside of just the art, the components are often lacking. One of the things that people talk about a lot is we have these player boards. Now, there is an entire secondary market of people out there who are willing to let you pay silly amounts of money to upgrade all your components in the game, and you better believe I've taken advantage of them. So my player boards are gorgeous. The player boards that come in the game, though, are just little pieces of cardboard, and you have to put about 9 little plastic cubes in very specific places on those. And if you even breathe on it, good luck remembering where all your cubes were before. So it is actually a real component issue. It's not just the art. It is the fact that a lot of people...
It's a playability
issue. If you bump it and you lose track of where all your cubes were on there, the game is over. I mean, it's kind of broken. I don't know how you reset it. So you really have to be very careful. You have to make sure nobody bumps the table or accidentally brushes all your cubes off. So
you have to be playing with Alfred,
yes,
the rule lawyer, who will remember where they were. Yes.
I have a lovely broken token organizer, which makes sure that the cubes stay in their little places with these sort of wooden overlays that hold everything in
They are
place.
laser cut.
They are laser cut wood,
and they are gorgeous and they are beautiful. And there's a card holder that's gorgeous and beautiful. And every card you put into a plastic sleeve that's not clunky but thin and sleek and lovely to handle.
Dragon Shield sleeves, which are definitely the most expensive sleeves you can get. And I happen to have played a lot of LCG, so I have a lot of them lying around, and I was able to sleeve probably 400 cards in this game. There are a lot of cards. So let's quickly talk about Terraforming Mars. What is it? It is a nuts and bolts engine builder. But it did something that no other game had done as successfully as this, and I'm not necessarily sure anybody's ever really done this, but it is a deck of unique cards. So usually when you have a deck of cards in a game like this, or even in a deck building game, you're going to have lots of the same cards, right? You're going to have money cards, you're going to have this, you're going to have that. This is a deck of 100 plus cards in the base game, and every single card is unique. Well, isn't that a nightmare to teach? No, because all you need to really learn is the basics, how things work, and then every time you get a handful of cards, you can understand what they all do because the symbols are pretty clear, and there's only so many things the cards can do.
The first few times I played the game, that drove me crazy because I had an underlying assumption about all board games that is actually a part of the whole board game ethos, which is a level playing field.
Right.
And unique card games do not have a level playing field. I started to love the game when I realized, when I adjusted my expectations, that this is not a level playing field. It is a bumpy playing field. We're going to have local maximums and minimums that are, but ultimately, because there are all these different unique cards that give you a choice of strategies, each of which, or enough of them, will be able to give you the opportunity to score points and win the game. It's just a more complicated bumpiness rather than a straight edge. And the moment that I accepted that, and the moment that I looked forward to that and anticipated that, I actually grew to really love it.
Well, I think the bumpiness you're speaking to could be called tactics as opposed to strategy. I think this is a game that is, and I'm just pulling this number out of my butt, I'd say 70% tactics, 30% strategy, meaning you cannot sit down at the beginning of this game and go, I'm going to try this strategy, because it is really, really about what cards you get and making lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah, it's like sculpting out of driftwood. It's whatever washes up on your beach.
Right.
But you have to recognize the shape that the card can become and where it can fit in your overall scheme. And the good thing about that is that the narrative is really, really intuitive.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the story of Terraforming Mars. So you are Terraforming Mars, and we are all different corporations who are playing the game. And if you're playing the version that we play, which is not the beginner version, you all have asymmetric powered corporations. So everybody is dealt 2 corporations at the beginning of the game, and they pick one. Each one of them is going to have a different amount of starting money and usually some kind of rule-breaking power. The goal of the game, though, is all these corporations have to terraform Mars. So there are 3 different endgame conditions. Once all 3 of these are met, the game is going to end at the end of that round. Those 3 conditions are oxygen, heat, and oceans. So you must build 9 oceans on the planet. You must get the oxygen meter all the way to the top, and you must get the heat all the way to the top.
Yeah, 14% oxygen and I think 8 degrees centigrade.
So once all 3 of those are met, the game will end at the end of that round, and whoever has the most points wins. So, but you are rewarded for hitting any one of these things. So anytime that you are bumping up one of the 3 endgame parameters, you are given a victory point as well as an increased income every round. So there is a huge benefit to being involved in fact, I don't necessarily think you can win the game if you're not helping a little bit, because there's so many points to be had from that. And also you get so many little perks and bonuses every time you do it as well. So we're all incentivized to get to the end game. I mean, people who have a fast engine are more incentivized. People who have a slow engine can slow it down, but that's kind of the fun of the game, is that everybody has a different level of control of how fast the game is going to end. But they're all equally incentivized to to take part in the terraforming of Mars.
There are also little bonuses at various stages of temperature and oxygen.
Exactly. This is very much a card-based game. It will appeal to people who like Magic the Gathering. It will appeal to people who like deck builders. And there are 2 ways to play this game. And the first one, I don't recommend for anybody, even on your first game. The first way to play this is just to be dealt cards every round. At the beginning of the game, you're going to get 2 corporations, as we said, and you're going to pick one. You're also going to get 10 cards. That's always the same. Everybody always starts with 10 cards. From those 10, you decide how many you want to keep. Well, why not keep all of them? Because they cost $3 each just to keep them. And that money is going to be deducted from the starting money that's listed on your corporation. So there's a real cost to playing these. And that cost does not also include the cost on the cards when you want to play them. So if you have a card that's going to cost 24, it's really going to cost 27 because you're paying 3 just to keep the card and then 24 to play it. So you have to take all those calculations in, which is nice at the beginning. You're not drafting because that would take a long time and there'd be a lot of AP in it. So here's your 10 cards. How many do you want to keep? Okay, but for every round after that, there are 2 versions of the game. One is you're dealt 4 cards. There you go. The other is, well, you're dealt 4 cards. You decide how many you want to keep, $3 each. The other version is a drafting mechanism. Now, this is where you're dealt 4 cards. You pass 3, keep 1. You do that till you have 4 cards. Then you decide how many you want to pay for and keep. I would not play the game without that version. I don't think it's a good game without that version, I will say as bluntly as that. I think the amount of chaos and randomness that comes from not drafting makes it not worth my time. I would, because somebody can just be dealt the nuts, as they say in poker. Somebody can just be dealt the perfect combo. Somebody can be dealt nothing. Somebody can be dealt, this is a chance to filter. Now, this is a game to me of filtering strategies. You start out, and in order to play this game properly, you have to keep almost all of the strategies on the table. You know a little bit what you're good at because you have your starting cards and you have your corporation you've chosen, but you can't just pick one thing. You have to keep, all right, I'm going to go for this, I'm going to go for this, I'm going to go for this, I'm going to go for this. Okay. 2 rounds later, all right, I'm going to knock this one off. Now there's 3 things I'm going for. 2 rounds after that, okay, it's down to these 2. These are the 2 main things I'm focusing on. By the very end of the game, there is one thing that you are jamming on in order to get your points. So you are slowly filtering down. So not drafting makes that impossible. It makes it a purely tactical game, but also not necessarily a very fun one because somebody could just be handed the exact card they've been waiting for. Now, of course, at the beginning of a round when they look at 4 cards, they could also see that card. But if everybody else is aware of what everybody else is doing, they're not going to see another one because you were going to make sure that they don't.
I want to say 2 more things about drafting. Normally, I hate drafting because it takes up so much time.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's a unique card game, right?
Yeah.
And drafting lets you see more cards.
Mm-hmm.
It lets you see 10 cards every round instead of 4.
Right.
And that's very important.
If you're playing with,
If you're playing with 4 people, right. Yes. And that's very important. The other thing about drafting is that it tells a better story because these are corporations, they're colonizing Mars, right? One corporation may discard the technology that another corporation will pick up and exploit because of how they're set up. So in this case, a game mechanic actually it plugs into the game narrative in a way that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, thematically, it also is loosely based on some great science fiction.
Yes, Kim Stanley Robertson's Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars trilogy.
Which is about the terraforming of Mars. And the designers themselves have said that was their main influence on it. But there are a lot of cards in the game that give some nods towards some other great sci-fi writers. And there's definitely enough fun there for people who love sci-fi or love,
I consider
Kim
myself
Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy.
I consider myself a science fiction fan, so I like it.
It was not lost on you.
No.
Jacob Frixelius is the designer. I have not said that yet. This is definitely Jacob's claim to fame. I mean, if we look at his board game thing, he did a few other games before this. There was a game called Space Station in 2011 and After the Virus, which came out a year after Terraforming Mars. But this is the Isaac Childress level of, just come out of the gate swinging hard and blowing everybody's mind with a massive... I mean, this is the number 4 ranked game overall on Board Game Geek. The top 4 is Gloomhaven and Through the Ages and Terraforming Mars and Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and then Twilight Struggle rounding us out at 5. And I really believe this game earns its place there. I think this is the defining game of the last 5 years. I think this will always be a classic Euro. I think it's a wonderfully heavy game, but that casuals can feel not too overwhelmed with because the tactical level of it. I mean, it is not, Kalis where you sit down and the better player is always going to win. The better player will usually win in this, but there is a certain level of tactics and fun. And there's that Agricola thing of like, well, even if I'm getting my butt kicked, I'm still building a beautiful engine that I can be proud of at the end of the game, which gives people satisfaction, even if they're not at the top of the score charts.
And every one of those unique 400 cards not only has a carefully designed and beautifully balanced mechanism, but also has a story.
Right.
Has a story about something happening on the surface of the planet that has some narrative interest and has some plausibility.
Yeah, no,
scientific plausibility.
I mean, some of them. We often play the cards and we joke about and laugh about what's happening on the cards. Like I'm sending an asteroid over to your part of the world right now and blowing up some of your stuff. And there is a tiny element of take that in the game, but I've never found it to be detrimental or feel like it was very swingy. It's usually it's also optional. So a lot of times players will go, I'm not going to do that because if you're going to start a war with somebody, you better be prepared to have them swing back. So a lot of times people go like, I'm not doing this. Nobody attack me. I'm not attacking you. But sometimes people will go, this asteroid hits, you lose 2 plants. It's not a huge thing. It could slow your round down a little bit, but it's never like I wipe out your engine. It's never going to be this huge sort of swingy take that aspect to it. But I like that it's there. There's a level of interaction, which I think some of the expansions also add to as well.
And there's a logic to it. Like when I started breeding cows, I had to reduce my forest growing capacity because the cows are eating the plants. I mean, it makes sense. And I like that. That's an extra step that the designer goes that not all games have.
We're going to talk about overall strategy a little bit, and then we're going to move into the expansions. There are 2 main ways to win this game. One of them is cities and forests. Now, there is a game board, a physical game board that you were playing on and laying tiles on.
A map of the planet.
A map of the planet. And there are a few other maps that we'll talk about with expansions. But the game comes with one map of the planet. And you are going to be laying tiles on that, either oceans or some of the special tiles that come in the cards. But mostly you're going to be laying forests. And sometimes you're going to be laying cities. Now, forests are worth 1 point each. When you lay a forest, it also increases the oxygen, which makes sense, and which gives you a little extra income and a point for the end of the game. And at the end of the game, each one of those forests is worth 1 point. But if you have a city, which you place a city, which you can either do through cards, or I think it costs $25 if you want to do it as a standard project. Standard projects are just basically actions you always have access to regardless of your cards. If you want to lay a city down, each city is worth 1 point for every adjacent forest. So this is a hexagonal board. So if something's in the middle, there are 6 things that can be around it. So each city could be worth 6 points. But if you control all 6 of those forests, that could be 12 points because each forest is worth 1 point. And that's a lot of points in a game that maybe will go up to 50, 60, 70 points in a 4-player, 5-player game. So cities and forests are definitely a strategy you often see people going for, and you don't want to fight too hard over that. If you see everybody going forests, it's probably not a good idea to, because the oxygen is going to level out really quickly. If everybody's putting forests down, it's going to max out really quickly, and you're going to be less incentivized to drop forests, because a huge part of dropping forests is that you are helping out to get the end game trigger, but mostly giving yourself income and points as you do it. And as soon as you are dropping them and not getting them, well, you're losing something, because usually you're getting 2 points for forest, really, if you're bumping the oxygen, because you're getting 1 point for raising the oxygen and 1 point at the end of the game for the forest. So as soon as oxygen maxes out, you are getting half the victory points that you would normally be getting for it. So if everybody's going for it, it's not good. One of the other strategies is there are a lot of victory point cards that get better as you add cubes to them. So there's microbes, and there's floaters in the expansions, and there's cows, and there's fighter ships, and all these different things that are all basically just cubes you put on them, and you know that that's what they mean, that's what they represent. And they're usually things like once per round, add a cube to this. At the end of the game, 1 point for every 2 cubes on the card.
Sometimes you need the source of the cubes. So
Right.
there are linked cards, and cards are linked to each other, which is an issue because it's a unique card game. You may not ever see the
Exactly.
card that is twinned or coupled to yours.
Right.
And a lot of cards are also linked to colonies.
Exactly.
Which we will discuss.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying about, not really being able to decide your strategy or where your main points are going to come from till the very end. And there is a shotgun strategy to this as well. You could win the game with a little bit of everything. A little points here, a little points there, a little points here. But the 2 biggest ways are through cities and forests and through resources on cards. Now, there's also something called awards and milestones, which are a decent source of points and something that cannot be ignored. I think you need to be competitive, at least in 1 award and potentially 1 milestone as well. Awards are end game victory conditions, and milestones are first person to do X, first person to have 16 cards in their hand, first person to have, I think, 8 forests down, things like that. And when you have achieved that, you don't just automatically get it. You actually have to take one of your actions and pay a certain amount of money and claim it. So there is a fun jockeying for position to see, and a race to see who gets these things first.
Because only 3 of them can be claimed.
Only 3 can be claimed, and of the awards, only 3. So those are all the awards are end game victory conditions. There are usually 5 or 6 if you're using expansion, and only 3 of them are going to be active at the end of the game. So if you have an end game condition that is necessary on getting that 5 points, so basically when you put a cube on one of these things and state this will be an end game victory condition, the first person gets 5 points, the second person gets 2 points. So if you need that 5 points, which is 5 points again in a game of 50, 60 points, that could be 10% of your whole score. If you need that, you need to make sure that gets scored, because if 3 others get chosen before that, you could be in trouble. So those are sort of the levers of the game. Now let's talk about the various expansions. The first expansion of the game came with no cards, which I at least was a little disappointed with, because that is the main crux of the game. I wanted more cards, but instead we got a double-sided map. Now, what was cool is thematically, we got the back side of Mars, and then one of them is a slightly different side of Mars as well. So it's just a different layout. There are different awards and milestones, which I think is the most important thing about the boards. They totally change up the potential endgame scores and the milestones that everybody's racing for. And They just give you a new way to play the game, a new strategies that can work. When you place things on the board, sometimes you get little bonuses. It changes up those bonuses. It changes. It's sort of an Age of Steam sense. It's going to change up the board a little bit. Now, it is not a necessary expansion. I think you'd be fine playing without it. If you play this game a lot, you're definitely going to want to have this because it gives you 3 times. It gives you 2 new boards out of. So now you have 3 boards to choose from when you play, and each one does really just change it up in terms of the awards and milestones. Is the biggest thing to me. So that was the first expansion. The expansion that came after that was, hold on, I have to actually look at these by year published. The one that came after that was Prelude. I would not play Terraforming Mars without Prelude, and I think most people who play the game would agree. This is a buy it with the base game expansion. I wouldn't even play it your first. I would just throw it in your first time. Here's what it does. It gives you a lot more corporations to choose from, which is always a good thing. And it gives you Prelude cards. So Prelude cards are new asymmetrical starting positions. So the Prelude cards will give you nice little bonuses. Now, the main thing they do is that there's a version of the game where everybody starts at 1. So everybody has these different productions, right? Everybody's building the same things. You have your money production, you've got steel, you've got titanium, plants, energy, and heat. Those are the 6 sort of resources in the game that you can produce. And usually in the game, people start everything at 1, so you're making a little bit. In this version, everybody starts at 0. And the cards that they draft at the beginning of the game, not draft, choose, you're given 4, you're going to pick 2. Along with your corporation, you're given 2, you pick 1. And your 10 cards, you have a lot of information at the beginning. That beginning can take a little while. Everybody figures it out. But they're fun decisions. From those 4 Prelude cards, you're picking 2, and that will decide what you produce and what you don't. Now, not only does this make the game so much easier on new players, because if everybody starts with the level playing field and the only thing that matters is your cards, you have a lot of choices to make and a lot of different routes to go. This, though, will really guide your opening decisions. This will guide, okay, this is what I'm good at. I produce energy. Let's find some cards that need energy production. Let's find this. It sort of puts you into a place where you have a smaller decision space, but a more interesting one where you actually feel like you're good at something. I felt in the first version of the game, there's a much slower build. It's going to take a lot longer for people's engines to start cranking, and those first few rounds aren't necessarily worth that those decision spaces. It's not that exciting to be watching everybody's engines just slowly creak together. This sort of, everybody has the beginnings of an engine, and everybody feels like they're doing something, they're starting something. So to me, this is a must-have expansion. It's a super cheap expansion. I think it's under $20. It's just a handful of cards. But Prelude to me was the first game changer. Never play it without it. Let's see. The next one after that was Venus Next. And Venus Next is actually, did Venus Next come out before? Oh man,
Colonies?
No, I know it came out before Colonies. It came out before. Sorry. Venus Next came out before Prelude. All right, let's talk about Venus Next. This actually came out at Essen the year that Tom and Trey and I were there. And Venus Next does 2 things. Now, this is a slightly controversial expansion in the fact that a lot of people didn't love it when it first came out. I think it has actually improved with the 2 expansions afterwards, which is Prelude, which I just talked about, and Colonies, which we're about to talk about. Venus adds Venus. It adds a little sideboard planet called Venus with a new track that as you go up it will up your VP and your money income. But it is not a new endgame condition. It doesn't matter how far you get up the track. Everybody doesn't need to work together to get it there. And often Venus Next will just sit there and no one will even do anything with it the whole game. Now, I think when people first bought the expansion, they felt like this would be, oh cool, a brand new, super important part of the game. And they noticed quickly that in most games, nobody really touches it. So I think a lot of people had the feeling of, well, what's the point of this expansion? Why do I care about this? But I have played games where it does become a big thing and it becomes important because it's actually a way of getting victory points and increasing your income without speeding up the game. So I think it's potentially a necessary expansion to reward players who are not incentivized to speed up the game. People who have a slower engine who need more time, but don't want to fall behind in the victory point race. So it gives you a place to do that. Now, outside of that, it also gives you a buttload of new cards, which are great and fun and add a new resource called floaters. It also just, it sort of, I can't necessarily speak to this because while I have a good amount of experience with the game, I don't have hundreds of games in it. I probably have 30. But I've heard people say that it balances other strategies well by injecting a good amount of new cards in there that help sort of overall balance the strategies you can have for winning.
But you put your finger on the problem. Because Venus, the Venus strategy is there later in the game when you realize you're falling behind and need a supplemental strategy. But by that time, you've seen so many of these floater cards, and because you weren't planning to use the Venus strategy, you let them go. So when you say, oh my God, I should go to Venus, you may not see the cards that actually will benefit you.
Right. Well, unless you have started with a corporation that rewards Venus or some prelude cards that reward Venus as well. Or your starting hand is really important. If your starting hand has 3 good Venus cards, I think you're incentivized to go. Yes, of course. If you choose no Venus cards and then in the draft you see 1, it's a little scary to go, well, do I want to dip my toe in the Venus stuff? But usually the Venus ones give you things that you want already and aren't necessarily put you in a Venus only path, because there's a lot of city cards that give you cool powers that sort of are new cities that go around Venus.
It's a little bit of a paradox. It's a supplemental strategy that you kind of have to choose to pursue from the beginning.
Totally. I don't think anybody needs Venus. I like it. I like having it there. I think it is, and something I'm going to talk about with a lot of these expansions, I think more stuff does not hurt this game, and because I think they found good ways of not making the game slow down. So,
agreed.
One of the cool things they did in Venus, which I would not play without, which is I think a rule that you should add, maybe even if you don't have Venus, which is at the end of every round, whoever was first player that turn automatically raises one of the 3 endgame conditions. So either places an ocean, raises the oxygen, or raises the temperature. Now, this guarantees the game will end in a certain amount of rounds. It also keeps things moving. It keeps. It means no matter if anybody's trying to slow it down, they now can't. Which I think Venus counterbalances that, because now you can bump you can't bump one of those 3 things. You can't bump Venus instead of one of those 3 things. But on your turn, you can see that the game is ending pretty rapidly, but you want to get some victory points. Venus is a good way to do that without exponentially increasing the endgame conditions.
And by the way, speeding up the game is not just to make the game go faster. Whenever we play with Venus, we actually wind up with a full map covered with cities and forests and oceans by necessity. So it's not like you don't feel like the mechanism of the game or the story of the game is being ended too soon. There really isn't that much left to do, even if you do speed it up, which is why speeding it up is a good idea.
And Venus is the cheapest way to raise your... So the thing we keep talking about where you get a victory point and your income is called TM, which I think is called the I don't know, I forget what TM stands for. Or no, it's TR, Terraforming Mars Rating, your TR. So the cheapest way in the game to raise your TR is with the Venus expansion. For 15, they call it mega bucks, I think. I'm just going to call it dollars. For $15, you can raise Venus once, which bumps your TR. TR is your endgame victory points. It is also your yearly income.
I think Trey or Tom will know exactly the average cost of a single victory point.
There has been a lot of discussion on that on Board Game Geek, and I think the overall consensus is about $4.50 per victory point.
So 15 is a lot.
Potentially, but it's a victory point and a income. So the earlier you do it, the more money you're going to be getting back off that investment. The later you do it, the worse, obviously. But the earlier you do it, the more money it will be making you every round. It could potentially pay itself back.
Sure. Right? No, that makes sense.
Let's talk about the expansion we're talking about today. This is the 4th major expansion. There's a lot of like little tiny card packs you can buy. Not necessarily packs, but 1 or 2 sort of promotional cards that BGG store has a bunch and things like that. The next one is called Colonies. That's what we're reviewing today. Colonies came out in 2018, I believe, last year, and it adds another new component to the game, another new sort of thing you can do with your standard actions. And it comes with these little triangle pieces, which are charmingly not aesthetically pleasing at all, like anything else in the game for the most part. They look very 3D printed, like somebody sort of made them at home and put them in your box. They fit
I think they were molded. I don't think they were 3D
they were not 3D
printed.
printed. They were molded, but they're representational of some sort of a ship. It looks more like a cursor on your computer that you use to click on things. You put your cube in it to show that it's your ship, and then everybody's ships goes to the colony hub. Now, there are two new actions you can do in the game. The first one is you can raise the colony level. So at the beginning of the game, I believe it is 3 colonies plus 2 for every player in the game, something like that. Maybe. I don't know. We had 6 in a 4-player game, so it's got to be 2 plus 2. I don't know. So N plus 2. I don't know, something like that. Yeah. But anyway, we had 6 in our game of 4. They come out randomly. I think there's 9 in the box, maybe 10. And from there, each one starts at a certain level, and you put these sort of white cubes on them, not representing any player, but just the overall white cubes.
Also, not aesthetically pleasing white cubes.
And they will automatically rise every round. And when you send your ship there, you get that number of the level in whatever resource that colony makes. So all the basic ones in the game are covered: plants and heat and money and things like that. And it is a way of sending your ship there and getting a huge instant boost of something. Like, you know what I need? I need 10 heat this round. There's no way to get 10 heat in the game usually, or a large number of any resource quickly. This game has always been about slowly building up your engine and over time making a certain amount of something. The colonies have a nice new thing of like, well, if nobody's gone there for 4 rounds, it's gotten up to 10. I can drop on there and get a huge resource boost and play a card that nobody could expect me to have played before, and could now make a unviable strategy viable. I think it leaves more strategies on the table now.
That's right, because you need resources like titanium, resources like steel, resources like plants and animals. And in the game, it's a unique card game. Almost all these resources you can get if you get a card that will allow you to mine those resources. Yeah. And you can go through an entire game without seeing that card or one of those cards. But those resources are generally useful for a lot of things. So the colonies are a way to make those generally useful resources accessible to anyone willing to spend the money to equip a ship. And
to send your ship to a colony, you can either spend, I believe it's $9 or 3 energy or 3 titanium, I believe. And titanium is usually worth $3. That's the same as cash. So 3 titanium is worth $9.
But of course, titanium is a very precious resource.
Well, especially if you have cards that need it. Yes. So you can send your ships there, and you don't have to use money to do it. So if you make a lot of energy, now energy as a resource has a value. Usually energy as a resource did nothing. There's very few cards that rewarded it. Energy as a production resource was valuable because you could spend energy production. If you produce 3 energy per round, a lot of really powerful cards in the game would ask you to reduce your energy production in order to play this card. And energy itself, though, usually would just become heat. At the end of the round, energy turns into heat very thematically, and you slide your energy over to heat. But energy as an actual resource never really had a hugely important role in the game. It does now, though. It is actually a very, and probably the most viable strategy for colonies, is for sending your ships places, is spending those 3 energy to move your ship. Now, you can only move your ship once per round. You have what I would call you have 1 worker. And this definitely adds a worker placement element to the game. When you send your ship somewhere, nobody else can go there that round, so there is a jockeying for position. There's first one there. Turn order really matters in terms of that. Gives you something to do with that energy, lets you move your worker there. And on top of that, though, it's not just about sending your ship, which I believe costs, like I said, $9 or 3 of those other 2 resources. But for $17, you can colonize the planet. You can take one of your colored cubes and put it on the track. When you put it there, it moves the track up farther. So whoever goes there is going to get more stuff quicker. But when you place it, you get a little bonus. It's usually going to be a production bonus. I'm going to place my cube, and I'm going to move up 1 on whatever that colony produces. So heat production, money production, whatever it is. But now for the rest of the game, and you can never be removed from this colony, for the rest of the game, anytime a ship goes there, you get a little bonus. And it's usually the same thing that the colony produces. So, for example, I think on the energy one, it's, somebody goes there, they get whatever it is. So if the level is 9, they'd get 9 energy. And if your cube is there, you get 3. And if you have your cube there and send your ship there, you would get 12, which makes it very awesome for you to have your colony there and go there. It could be a huge boost of something. But if it's a very popular planet and everybody in this game needs this certain resource, you're going to get rewarded every round for doing nothing other than at the beginning having spent a not unsizable amount of money, is $17 to put your cube there. But if it is going to be something that you think people are going to be going there often in a 10-round game, that could pay off hugely for you.
My complaint about Colonies that I generally like is that it's not quite as integrated into the cards as I would like it to be. You're invited to build lots of colonies if you can.
Yeah. So Colonies did add a not unsizable as well amount of cards to the game.
But the cards, again, it's a unique card game.
Right.
And I felt that I was getting cards that allowed me to get victory points from my colonies. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of steps involved. I did not know those mechanisms in advance.
Yeah.
And the cards were not as intuitive in terms of how do I convert colonies into points.
Right.
There are a few of those opportunities. There could be more, and they could be better integrated.
Now, do you feel that these new cards dilute the overall deck?
By definition. I'm never going to complain.
Well, not necessarily by definition, if they are also adding in a more balanced number of cards that we previously saw that were, like certain strategies.
Unless you start drafting with more cards. There's not an easy way to deal with it. Balance always dilutes. In fact, that's part of the definition of balance, right? Like a buffered solution, you're adding more acid and you're adding more base, and you're diluting the effect. So there's a balance within the balance.
I was definitely looking as I played to see, would I see all of the main strategies in the game? And would I see them in a number that felt viable to actually achieving them? And I really felt like there was nothing I didn't see. I saw floaters. I saw all the things from Venus. I saw animals. I saw ships. I saw all the sort of main things. And I don't feel like I saw them in fewer numbers than I saw before.
But there's also an order that you have to see them in, right? Because some cards require a foundation.
Well, that's tactics, though, isn't it? I mean, like that's, if you have to sort of be building upon what you had before, but keeping yourself flexible.
You have to know enough already to be able to see, here's a card that I can't play now,
right,
that involves a floater, but I know there are cards that will give me floaters that I can then put in this card, and I should be looking out for them later.
Right.
And yes, that is something that you are, after playing the game enough times, you're going to anticipate.
Yeah.
But it's a lot to ask.
Yeah.
And again, if what you're mainly doing is adjusting the balance, a very advanced player doesn't need as much balance as an early player.
Sure.
So you're kind of like, you're giving and you're taking away at the same time.
Yeah.
You're adding to the balance, but you're taking away the usability or the integration. You're diluting, and they don't all work together.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm at my limit for the amount of cards I want to add into this game. It's a silly level of cards at this point. So I actually have the Broken Token Organizer comes with a standing upright deck holder that holds.
And it's beautiful and laser cut and has a rocket on the side. With a plume.
But it is full. I cannot hold now. If I want to add more cards to this thing, I'd have to unsleeve my cards. And in fact. This is a little bit of a component issue as well. To me, there is a printing difference in some of these different expansions, which makes, forget the printing difference, although I have noticed there's a slightly different color variation on the backs of the cards, slight. But the main thing is, if you have played the base game a lot, and you have not sleeved your cards, and you add in a new expansion, it's going to be very clear what cards have been played before and which cards are crisp and brand new and beautiful and have no dings on them at all. So you basically can see, how many cards somebody has in the newest expansion. You just see the wear on the back of the cards, which to me breaks the game a little bit.
How many times a day do you wash your hands? And when you leave a room, do you have to turn the lights on and off a certain number of times?
No, it's not necessarily an OCD thing. I think it's a playability issue. I think like if you have it's very clear what cards in the deck were from which expansions by how much play they have on them. I mean, it's just the amount of time and wear on the cards. Anyway, that bothers me in games, which I guess could also be seen as an OCD thing. But
I used to be the same way about my books, and then you gave me a Kindle as a gift, and that ruined me. That completely ruined me.
Look, I think Colonies is not necessary. I don't think it is a must-buy expansion. I think it is an expansion that adds things that you could ignore and still win. What I think was great, and here's what I think is great about all these expansions. I don't think they are necessary paths of victory now. I don't think, sort of like Great Western Trail added a new thing. And if you are not paying attention to that, if you're not using the new mechanisms involved, you are going to lose. I don't think you have to focus on Colonies. I don't think you have to focus on Venus Next. I think that's fun. I like the fact that, I can sort of play vanilla with these expansions involved and not going to have a hard time. I don't think the deck is diluted enough to the point where you are now being forced to play different parts of the game. There are just more modules.
Are there more Venus Next cards than Colony cards?
I think they're about the same amount. I think they were pretty close. They're both.
I don't think I saw the same amount.
Equally, okay. Yeah. Well,
but maybe because I was interested in actively looking for Colony cards.
Yeah.
And then Venus cards, so those floaters kept coming in instead. Maybe because I was playing with wily, experienced players who kept sending them to me.
Outside of the added rules explanation of these expansions, I don't think there is an added time element to them. I think the game actually played a little faster with Colonies because there were times when you would have these huge injections of cards, which had allowed you to do more. A huge injection of resources which had allowed you to do more. I genuinely think Colonies sped up the game because we had more resources coming in. We had more to work with. We could play more cards. We could boost the end game conditions faster.
And Venus definitely speeds up the game.
Venus definitely speeds up the game with a rule that you could add without buying Venus. You could just say at the end of every round, whoever's first player, you're going to bump up one of the 3 endgame parameters. So I really like the idea that this game is becoming sort of a sandbox system. And I'm not worried about Turmoil, which is on Kickstarter right now. It's just finished on Kickstarter yesterday. By the time you hear this, it'll have been done for about a week. It adds a brand new module, sort of like Colony, sort of like Venus. And this one is governing. You're going to be choosing the government that will take over on Mars and the policies that they will employ on Mars. And
DMITRY.
It is sort of the DMITRY element of being added to Terraforming Mars. Now, the only thing that I think could possibly be bad about this is if you have to use it in order to win now. As long as it is just there and something that can help your strategy or become a new strategy, which is balanced with the others, I have no problem how many modules they want to add. Now, the only problem I have is this is going to come with another chunk of cards, and I'm literally I don't have room for it. And the stack becomes silly at some point. So I don't know. It'd be nice if in the box there was a way of culling your deck somehow. And
I was just thinking about that as we were talking, that an interesting expansion would actually allow you to remove certain cards from the game and replace them. And I definitely felt that some of those cheaper cards that talk about like Scientific Institute that are there just to give you, each card has a little tag on it, and some cards require you to have lots of a particular tag.
Yeah, the tags are prerequisites usually for other cards.
And there are a few cards that are cheap that just add a tag and maybe a single benefit, one-time benefit. These now seem a little basic and not terribly useful and not at the same level as the rest of the cards.
You think there's a little bit of a power creep issue?
Yes. And I do like, because I'm so attracted to the narrative element of games, to me, more than Venus, more than the colonies. The government, the turmoil, is part of a necessary next step
story-wise. Totally.
Story-wise, so I think it belongs there more than the previous extensions. Not having played it, of course, maybe it sucks, but I don't think so.
Well, I'm very excited to try it, but we have at least another 6 to 9 months to enjoy all of these other expansions before we throw in a new one. Another way to play Terraforming Mars, if you just want to try it before you buy it, is on Steam. There is a digital version of Terraforming Mars. It has no expansions. You are playing the vanilla base game alone. You can play with friends online. I believe it's PC only, no Macs. This is not on Android, or this is not on your iOS. This is only on PC, desktop computers, or laptops. The game is usually $30. It's on sale right now for $15. I can't tell you if that sale still exists by the time this goes live. It is a great way to play the game against the AI. This game plays solo on the table. I would prefer to play it on the computer outside of not having any expansions. Hopefully they're going to add those expansions. It's worth checking out if you want to try the game. $30 is at least cheaper than the base game. I think it's usually about $50-$60, especially with all the expansions. It's going to cost you quite a bit, although the expansions are about $20 each, I think. But either way, I think it's worth checking out. Overall, I'm going to give Colonies a good review. I know Tom, he played it once, maybe twice. He did not feel it added enough to the game to add it in. I feel like he felt it diluted it. I don't feel like any of these expansions dilute anything because they are not necessary paths to victory. Whether or not that is a negative for you, you might feel like, well, why add something if it doesn't necessarily change the flow of the game? That's fine. I understand that. You might feel like you're not getting your money's worth on it, or it's not worth taking up the table space. It does. I like having those extras there. It gives me new thoughts, like, Colonies to me opens up new routes of tactics. Like, I got a card this round. Oh, well, I'm first player, and there's 10 titanium I could get this round. And this card, now I can play a card I would have never been able to play before. And that could open up a whole new strategy to me. It just gives you more things to do. There's a level of player interaction that I think is added by it. We are now, turn order matters in a big way. And it used to only matter for awards or milestones or for placing cities. It now matters for colonies. As things move up, you start noticing what's valuable. It becomes a fight. A lot of first actions are going to be about snagging those colonies. But not, if people start putting their colonies down there, so they're getting rewarded every time your ship goes there, that de-incentivizes you to go there because, well, now I'm giving every other player who went there something awesome. I think it adds a fun level of player interaction. So if you were looking for player interaction in Terraforming Mars, if you felt like it was, multiplayer solitaire, I think Colonies could potentially solve that for you.
And again, the underlying game is wonderful.
Yeah, I don't think Colonies takes away anything from the game. But I also cannot say that you should never play without it or that you need to buy it. I do think you need to buy Prelude. And I do think if you like modern board games, you need to buy Terraforming Mars if you don't own it, or at least you need to find somebody who doesn't play it. I think it is a staple. I think it's a classic at the level of Agricola. I don't think it's going anywhere.